Last month, everyone's favorite Canadian carnivore, Jordan B. Peterson, tweeted some criticism of ChatGPT, claiming that the language model is biased and that its creators are purposefully censoring conservative perspectives. This tweet is very silly, partially because it's clear that Jordan Peterson just doesn't understand how large language models work, but it did get me thinking. Is poetry inherently left-wing? Most of the time when we imagine contemporary poets, we imagine unemployed postmodern leftists with blue hair, right? But is that all there is? Well, this question really piqued my interest, and April is National Poetry Month, so I decided to spend my month going on a journey to find the best or worst conservative poetry. And what I found was actually really surprising. There is a lot of historical poetry that is technically conservative, but what I wanted to look at specifically is contemporary conservative poetry, poems that are written by living poets and that speak to our current society and culture. Now, I don't tend to read a lot of political poetry anyway, it's just not really my thing, but I didn't even know that contemporary conservative poetry was a thing until my friend Jose told me about this book, Red Pill Rhymes, A Poetical Awakening. And let me tell you, this book sucks. Red Pill Rhymes was written by R.K. Gandhi, and right off the bat, you really get a sense of exactly what kind of poetry you're going to be subjected to in this book, because the first page tells us this book is dedicated to the dedicated. We're then provided with a preface, a poem letter to the reader telling us what we should expect from the rest of the book, and it definitely does a good job of setting up expectations. I just addressed this to whomever. And yes, while it may look confusing AF at first, like someone writing poems about whatever, but if you're super sensitive, you should stick to poets who cater to your needs, the go-getters who write about superficial, fluffy things, the kind of light shit pop culture remembers. Here's a warning, should you choose to unleash the divine beast inside. Language used may be foul for a few who devour this feast for the eyes. Reader discretion advised. Well, what can I say? We've been warned. The thing about this book is that the poetry just isn't good. It is full of amateur-level alliteration and rhyme schemes that really only make sense if you're not really reading that closely, and no meter or rhythm to speak of, and the metaphors are weak at best. Like, you know how one of the hallmarks of a bad prose writer is when their characters all have the same voice? This book is like that. All of the poems sound the same, and they all sound bad. They sound like if a freshman took a Poetry 101 class from Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's like baby's first poetry. It's, wow, I just learned about alliteration and internal rhymes and enjambment, and now I'm going to use them everywhere. In fact, I developed an entire minigame for my friends to play where they tried to guess which lines from this book are real and which ones are fake, because it just so bad. So what we're going to be doing is a little quiz where you have to determine which lines are real and which lines are fake. So yeah, that is the plan today. I guess for anybody who is unfamiliar with both of you, would you like to introduce yourselves real quick?
Sure, can do. Hello. I'm Lois Sebastian. I run a YouTube channel of the same name.
Okay, I am Jose of the Jose channel.
Oh my god.
I can read it.
Sorry. It's so bad.
Which of these is not a real line from an R.K. Gandhi poem? A. Meticulously placed peels on our road to freedom makes this some crazy-ass Mario Kart shit. B. A generation built on memes and GameStop. C. No love, only megalovania. Or D. Who cares? It's a hashtag new thing, bitch.
I don't even know what megalovania means.
You've-
Which makes me want to go with that.
Have you not heard the
actually.
song? It's like the meme song. Lily, you're an artist. Sing Megalovania.
No.
So I'm going to go with that one. See, just because I don't know what it is, and why not? At this point, why not?
You are correct. So there's something about the crazy ass Mario Kart shit, especially the Like
The line-
enjambment. Yeah, the line break between crazy ass. So good.
Crazy ass. I love ass Mario Kart shit. I mean, ass shit is great on its own. Ass shit. But ass Mario Kart shit, amazing.
This game was a ton of fun, and if you want to see the entire recording of the whole game and the subsequent conversation with me and Jose and Lola, or if you just want to help support the channel, then go ahead and join my Patreon at patreon.com/Zoe_B. That is linked in the description also. Or you can click the join button down there next to the subscribe button, and you can get access to that recording as well as some extra goodies. But anyway, back to the terrible poetry. In a book titled Red Pill Rhymes, you would expect plenty of red pill talking points, right? Well, that's what I was hoping for when I picked it up. But when it comes to politics, most of the political poems are about how society today is too soft and sensitive, but also how dare the government make us wear masks? That is an infringement of my rights, and we are literally living in 1984 because we can't even watch The Lone Ranger or wear t-shirts with Optimus Prime on them anymore. And yes, before you ask, he does have the one joke, you know, the one where he says, "You identify as a Walmart greeter." So be sure to cross that one off your bingo card. Most of his conservative positions, though, aren't as explicitly political as they are aesthetic. Most conservative artists hate modern and postmodern art because it isn't made to be exclusively, explicitly beautiful, and when it comes to poetry, beauty, to them at least, means formal structure and rhyme. And our boy RK definitely agrees here. Not only do pretty much all of his poems rhyme, but in several poems he also rails against insta-poets, who have words ridiculously spaced, with outrageous line breaks to make it seem special. And he says that modern pop poetry is thin and uses shortcut recipes. But RK is different. He's not creating for the likes. He's a breed and writer of a different kind, one that rewards you when you read, but requires a little patience and time. He's not like other poets. He's a cool poet. He's actually deep, unlike those dirty Insta poets who just write about horoscopes, apparently. Anyway, overall, Red Pill Rhymes wasn't a great book of poetry, but it wasn't the worst. Like, honestly, I think most of the poems in this book would make better song lyrics than poems. Like, RK Gandhi, if you're watching this, I think that you should be a rapper and not a poet. Like, seriously, this isn't even a joke. I genuinely think that that is what you should do. This book definitely had conservative and anti-woke undertones, but I knew that there had to be something better out there, something that was fundamentally, deeply conservative. So I kept looking. When you search online for conservative poetry, one of the most popular sources for this niche genre is the Society of Classical Poets, a nonprofit organization whose mission is, and I quote, "to preserve humankind's artistic traditions with a particular emphasis on beautiful poetry." They, like RK Gandhi, think free verse represents everything wrong with modern society, and their goal is to bring formalism back to the forefront of art. But even though there is no explicit reference to politics in the organization's mission statement, whenever they publish political poems, those poems seem to come from an exclusively conservative point of view. They post poems about abortion and immigration and COVID mask policies and free speech and gender roles and the good old days. They have several poems about Trump, more than I cared to count, and one Trump poem in particular is actually the website's claim to fame, the inaugural poem for Donald J. Trump. And I'm sure you're thinking, oh, so this is the person who wrote the official poem for Trump's inauguration? And the answer is no, they did not. They wrote fanfic about Donald Trump being a powerful descendant of Scottish nobility, and it's amazing.
Inaugural Poem for Donald J. Trump, Pibroch of the Donal, by Joseph Charles Mackenzie. With purpose and strength, he came down from his tower to snatch from a tyrant his ill-gotten power. The Donal's a giver, while others just take, ne'er gaining from that which his hands did not make. True friend of the migrant, from both far and near, he welcomes the worthy, but guards our frontier. But for all his great wisdom, the braw, gallant man is matched by his children, the handsome Trump clan. Get up and walk free, all ye brave men and proud. Long life to the Donal, the best of MacLeod. Congratulations, Mr. President.
Isn't it great? This guy, Joseph Charles Mackenzie, is also just, like, a terrible guy who confidently and with no self-awareness compares himself to Shakespeare and genuinely believes that his poetry is ordained by God to change the entire landscape of poetry as we know it. And he describes Maya Angelou's poetry as a heap of chopped up prose noodles topped with a tin can sauce of shop-worn Whitman-esque metaphors, formless, aimless, and incoherent. And he may or may not be lying about a lot of his credentials because some of the names that he brings up as being his, like, advisors and teachers just don't exist. And even some of the awards that he claims to have won just don't appear to be real. But I have links in the description for you to check all of that stuff out yourself because that's a rabbit hole that we just do not have time to get into right now. The Trump inauguration poem is very silly and a little bit gross, but it's clear that it came out of a place of love. It's like the text version of a Ben Garrison cartoon. But the SCP website also has several poems that are not silly caricatures of Trump. Many of their political poems end up being pretty awful. Now, I want to give a quick content warning here because there are some genuinely vile and cruel poems posted on this site, and I'm not going to be reading any of them here, but I will be talking about them, so if you don't want to hear any of that, then go ahead and skip to the timestamp on screen. This website has proudly posted poems celebrating the deaths of trans people. They have poems comparing gender-affirming care to child sacrifice. In fact, anti-trans poems seem to be their new favorite subgenre, since it seems like every week there's a new hateful screed posted by Susan Jarvis Bryant, their resident archetypal British TERF. They also have poems covering more classic conservative themes, like poems praising Christopher Columbus for doing genocide, and cops for doing murder, and others claiming that immigrants are dangerous predators coming into your home and eating your food and playing in your pool and giving you nice little kisses on the cheek. Seriously, I am fully in support of interpreting this poem to be genuinely pro-immigrant. I like it, actually. Anyway, these poems are, of course, not officially endorsed by the Society of Classical Poets in any way, and by saying that at the bottom of every poem published on their site, they cannot legally be held accountable for any stochastic terrorism that is done by their poets. Ow! Please don't bite the soft little parts of my arm. So the Society of Classical Poets is bad, but it's bad for different reasons from why R.K. Gandhi's poetry collection was bad. Gandhi's collection was silly. You would really just laugh or roll your eyes at worst. But the SCP, on the other hand, they cover more of the classic conservative values with their nature poems and religious poems, but they also house some of the worst tendencies of current right-wing politics, with all of their poems on culture war nonsense. At best, their pastoral and religious poems are okay. At worst, they're perpetuating racism and the genocide of trans people. But I do have one final selection of conservative poetry that I want to share with you today, and reading it changed everything. This book is called An American Conservative, a Poetry Collection by Joe S. Patterson, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a poetry collection from a real red-blooded American conservative, and it was published in 2016. Like the last two entries we looked at, this collection is also full of awkward rhyme schemes, but compared to Red Pill Rhymes and the Society of Classical Poets, this book is one of the weirdest poetry collections I have ever read. Because This is less of a poetry collection and more of a political platform or party mission statement. Each of these poems argues for an explicit policy position on an issue like taxes or war. Let me read you an excerpt. This is from Reduce the Budget with Bonds. The government should have special issue bonds and see how the public responds. In this way, the government can advance and secure much-needed finance. The bonds can help fund specific projects without using taxpayer checks. Thus, government programs with enough market demand can proceed as planned. We can use bonds with distant maturity to fund projects like Social Security, to ease costs to the nation and avoid general stagnation. Honestly, we need more poems about using bonds to reinvigorate the economy. Why don't more political parties use poetry in their platforms? That, I think, would fix every single political issue in this country if more political parties did that. That's it. That's the solution. But this is what every single poem is like. It just goes on and on like this for hundreds of pages. Honestly, while I was reading, I kept waiting and waiting for the poetry to get good, or to just get worse even. But it was all just middling. A lot of the poems don't really have, like, internal consistency, like this one where he argues for reasonable military spending and to avoid the tendency to overextend our military. But also, in the same poem, he says we should continue to upgrade military gear. He does this across multiple poems too, where he says that we should lower taxes and get out of perpetual wars, but that we also need to invest more into our military. But even these sorts of poems aren't that bad. There are a few that get as violent as some of the ones from the Society of Classical Poets, like these two about stopping crime, which contain lines like, "Give more powers to the police, or we'll never have peace. We should bring back forced penal labor. Don't force someone to be their neighbor. When we hand out a ruling, it should be sufficiently grueling. Remove them from the population before the next escalation. They are so morally destitute, the only choice is to execute." But these are as bad as it gets. The vast majority of the poems in this book are just boring. I mean, they all have the same exact rhyme scheme, and they even have a tendency to repeat the same specific words and phrases, like, "decrease startup costs and less economic opportunity will be lost," which they say, like, at least 2 or 3 times throughout the entire collection, and rhyming manufacturing with fracturing, which is a bold rhyme, and I'm honestly kind of here for it. So I forgot to mention it during the recording, but also, this guy just doesn't exist. It says in the book that Joe S. Patterson is a pseudonym, and that it's like a collection of people, and there's a link to a blog, but the blog doesn't exist anymore. And if you go to the blog website using the Internet Archive, there's only a couple of specific blog posts that are still saved. Like, the About page is gone, and so there's, like, no way to actually figure out who this guy is. So if anyone out there is able to figure out who this Joe S. Patterson nom de plume represents, that would be amazing, because as far as I know, this is just some random ghost, and it's kind of creepy. It's just so boring. But this actually piqued my interest. Like, this poetry was so bland that it circled back around to being interesting again. When I was reading, I kept asking myself, why was this poetry so different from the stuff that I had read up until now? Where was all the transphobia and racism? Where was the outcry against woke, or at that point in history, political correctness and social justice warriors? I mean, this came out around the same time as Gamergate and Trump's first presidential campaign, but you would never know it just by reading these poems. So, what happened? Why was this collection from 2016 so different from the stuff published after 2020? Well, because this was so confusing, I decided to go back to my other sources and see if rereading them with this new context in mind would help me to get anything new out of them. And something really interesting came out of this reading, but I'm just warning you, it's kind of a lot. I read every single poem on the Society of Classical Poets website. Literally thousands of poems published between 2012 and 2022. And I determined whether they were explicitly political or not. And if they were political, I noted what kind of politics they touched on. Whether, like Joe Patterson's collection, it was mostly focused on policy, or whether it was focused on culture war issues, or something else. And then I put all of that data into a graph to map out the total percentage of political poems over time, as well as the ratios of what type of politics were covered in those political poems. This video was supposed to be just like short and simple, and it was going to be fun, and it was going to be junk food, and then I decided to read 3,000 poems and calculate a bunch of data and make cute little charts out of it. This is what I put myself through for all of you. Please subscribe. These earrings make my ears itch. Isn't this fascinating? I mean, there was clearly some kind of shift in what people were writing about, especially around 2020, when there was a huge jump in poems about culture war stuff like COVID, systemic racism, and trans rights. Now, when I started crunching the numbers, I was sure that this big jump would have started around 2016 or 2017 during Trump's campaign and his first year in office. I mean, there is data showing that Trump's election coincided with a jump in hate crimes, so I figured that it would also match up with this increase in hateful poems too. But that's not what the data shows. The percentage of political poems overall has stayed relatively consistent, hovering around 25% over the past decade, except for 2013. 2013 was the most boring year on record, and we all know it, and even this poetry site knows it. Like, I challenge you to remember literally anything from 2013. That's a trick question, because you can't. It was the most forgettable year. Anyway, while the overall percentage of political poems has stayed about the same, the ratios have shifted dramatically. 10 years ago, most of the political poems were about policy stuff like war, or about more squishy, inoffensive topics like patriotism and the good old days. But now, the vast majority of political poems are about fascist COVID policies and the terrors of critical race theory and the simultaneous absurdity and evil of trans people, and how the left wants to rewrite history and how no one is allowed to speak the truth anymore. So, what happened? What happened to conservative poetry? Around 2020, what do you think specifically sparked this increase in like culture war stuff?
Racism. Jericho Brown won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 2019 for The Tradition. This pissed off white supremacists so hard in particular. Like the reaction, there were a lot of alt-right accounts at the time that were like, we have to mobilize and become poets again.
I don't know if one person winning a prize really did set people off, but that would track. Like, even the smallest, slightest infringement on that dominance is seen as some sort of catastrophic loss. Like, this is some kind of disaster because, you know, the poetry prize should always go to white guys, I guess. And the second it doesn't, then white people are under attack. And now they got to produce some poetry to reflect that.
This certainly makes a lot of sense, but it also makes me wonder, is this shift reversible? I honestly hope it is, because this culture war poetry sucks. Like, not only is it hateful, but it's also just not very good. It's like their hatred of the left is getting in the way of their love of their art. Even the Donald Trump inauguration poem was better than most of the culture war stuff being published by the SCP now. Like, I don't like the content of it, obviously, but the poem itself was pretty good, I have to admit. At the end of the American Conservative collection, the writer actually shifted away from his policy poems into something different. Instead of writing little pleas for lower taxes and more defense funding, he started writing about his family and nature and the American pastoral fantasy. And it was still not good. Like, there's one where he writes about going to a national park, and it's pretty okay, but it contains the line, "The plants gave off a sticky sap and a really bad smell," which is just objectively a terrible line of poetry. But even this was probably better than most of the other stuff he was writing about, and it was definitely better than the transphobic drivel from the SCP or the woe is me cancel culture poems from R.K. Gandhi. But if the culture war started by Trump and then fueled by COVID and the 2020 police brutality protests is what turned conservative poetry into this soulless, hate-filled garbage, is that it? Is that all that conservative art has to offer? Was Jordan Peterson right that the only future for poetry exists on the left? Is conservative political poetry doomed to be forever stuck in anti-woke culture war hell? I think that it would be wrong to conclude that all conservative art sucks. Because it's not really that all conservative poets are bad writers. It's that what conservative poetry has become is bad writing. Traditional conservative themes like pastoralism, family, personal freedom, individualism, liberty, and a focus on the past are all great topics for poems. It's just like what Cody Johnston said in the Some More News episode about conservative comedy.
The real answer is that conservatives actually are funny. Just not in this country or during this era. And in fact, you could even argue the answer is simpler. That the unfunny people we've been talking about simply aren't conservatives in the traditional sense. Because conservatism in this country has lurched far beyond what other countries would define as right-wing. And now their agenda isn't to sell us on Republican or Christian humor, rather than tirelessly demonize the left in the context of furious culture war bullshit that was inflamed by Trump's presidency. I don't know if you recall, but there were actually funny conservative comedians as recently as the mid-2000s.
I think the big question about the future of conservative art comes down to what conservatism means and where it comes from. All of the poetry that I read for this video was still conservative. All of the poets wanted to conserve the status quo and tradition and history. All of the poets that I read from today dislike modernity, but they come at it from different angles. There's the contempt for contemporary poetry in Gandhi's collection and the SCP poems, and even Patterson's book was written in a more formal style. What are you eating? And even Patterson's poetry was written in a more formal style. This conservative view of aesthetics isn't my cup of tea, but at the end of the day, it's not actively harmful. What is actively harmful, though, is the conservative culture war stuff. This is what sets Patterson's book apart from Red Pill Rhymes and the Society of Classical Poets. The latter two are full of contempt and hatred for trans people, and they fearmonger things like CRT. This anti-woke position isn't just vile, but it also just makes for bad art. But there's a third angle. The romanticization of pastoralism and an idealized past. This was something totally lacking in Red Pill Rhymes, but it was the backbone of the early days of the SCP, and was the subject of several of Patterson's better poems. And it was actually pretty good. The religious and pastoral poems aren't really my thing, but they're really not bad. Like, I would genuinely love it if more conservative poets went that direction with their political art. The pastoral stuff and the religious stuff can be really good. But because the conservative movement here in the US has drifted further and further away from those themes, so too has their art. And this new art, this violent, hateful poetry, is bad. It's not clever, it's not well done, it's been written out of spite and fear and hatred, and it's obvious. So if you, like Jordan Peterson, think that poetry has been taken over by the left, even to the point where AI-generated poetry can't help but be biased against conservatives, I think that you should just stop and think about what you mean by conservative poetry. Because if this is the future of conservative art, maybe we should just let it die. You're kind of ruining this deep moment. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. This was a silly one, but I hope you liked it. And if you did, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell and like and comment and do all those YouTube things. I was hoping to get this video out like 2 weeks ago, but then I got really stressed and my skin decided to like self-destruct and I had an eczema flare-up, and all of this is because I have a surgery coming up, probably like the day after this video goes live. So it's not like a big deal or anything. It's really it's really like a basic, you know, it's not a big deal. But anyway, I do have an exciting announcement though. If you haven't seen the posts yet, I have recently started a podcast with my two friends, Jose and Lola, called the Only Warrior Cats Podcast, where we are reading through the entire Warrior Cats series. We have just finished recording the first like arc of 6 books, and that first episode is coming out on May 1st, which should be the day that this video releases. Maybe the day after this video releases. We'll see how long it takes to edit. But I have all of the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check that out. I am so excited. It is such a super fun project. If you want to help me be able to afford to feed my own little warrior cats, then consider joining my Patreon at patreon.com/Zoe_B, where you can get lots of cool stuff like early access to videos and exclusive content, like my full conversation with Jose and Lola that I referenced in this video, and have a chance to have a poem written for you by me, an actual published poet, though I don't know if that does that title like mean anything anymore after this video? Today's Patreon poem is for Asagi Teddy Bear, which is a lovely name. I do actually kind of like it. And their poem is White-Throated Sparrow. See there, that patch of black and white, almost chickadee amongst the myrtle leaves? Watch her hop across branches, almost dancing. She lingers. For what? Here now, she sings laughter, almost a question that sounds like the taste of lemons. She eludes me still, that white-throated sparrow, but each morning she sings, and I stop, and I listen. And until next time, stay safe, stay warm, and I will see y'all again soon, I hope. Bye, folks. I don't know if you can tell, based on my last couple poems that I read in videos, but I've been doing a lot of bird watching lately. I've been like getting really into bird watching, and it's actually a wonderful, very meditative kind of thing. I'm really enjoying it. But sorry I keep writing about birds. I just really like them. I think birds are neat. Also, they're like white-throated sparrows. Look up their songs. Like, look up what their song sounds like. It is beautiful, and I love it so much. Anyway, all right. I think that's it. What a good belly. What a good belly for a good boy. What if I just teased you a little bit? Oh, Desmond. Are you glad that I have the couch back? What a good boy.